So I have a really special person with me. Arvind is the director of marketing at McDonald's. Overall, he's had over 18 plus years of experience with a varied amount of stints across categories, across industries, including FMCG, including retail. Before McDonald's, if I'm correct, Arvind was with Kaya, where he led a strategy role and sort of led it through an explosive growth. Before that, he spent some time at Levi's. He had an international stint with TVS and in the automotive industry, etc., etc. And I'm very, very excited because I think you hardly have people in marketing who've cut across so many categories. So I can't wait to get my hands dirty and ask him some sort of intriguing questions. Most of our chat today is going to be around marketing. It's going to be around trends on social media and how his organization and organizations before have traversed their journey on social media. We'll keep this short and we'll open it up for questions towards the end. Arvind, why don't you start?
Great. So it's been a fantastic journey, and of course the early days of digital I still remember, where it was all about a website and a kind of a brochure online, to today's exploding digital age where there are so many varied social media platforms, and marketeers have to start as consumers first, understanding these platforms from a consumer perspective before they kind of wear their marketing hat and seek to kind of master the medium as to what would work from a consumer and a brand perspective. So that's I've seen a kind of a journey on that in that sense. Angad, what about you? So you have launched great brands like MensXP and IDEVA, which are fantastic platforms on their own right, and you led them from start to where they are today. So you want to talk about that too?
No, I think specifically to social media, because a lot of businesses that I've started have been sort of brought up on social media. Initially when we started, we were a text-led business. We forayed into short-form video content, and now into commerce. And that's largely in tandem with the trends of social media. So if you look at the evolution of social media even right now, the lines between what a social platform versus, say, what a commerce platform or even a media platform is supposed to do are blurring. And I think our strategies have broadly evolved with that. But Arvind, I think, I want to sort of take the bull by its horns. And before I get into how Swiggy and Zomato, etc., are impacting your life for the good or for the worse, tell me, how does a brand like McDonald's decide which platforms to be on? Right? Are you on TikTok right now?
Not as a branded platform, but we collaborate with influencers on TikTok.
So is it mainly like campaign-led?
It's tactically, it's campaign to campaign led. We are just finding our feet as far as the platform goes, what works, what kind of content works, what is the benefit to the brand by being on TikTok. So we have experimented with a few formats, but early days in that sense.
But are they sort of global mandates, or are these vertical-led or country-led decisions on as to what platform to be on?
So it's left to business, country to country. The great thing about McDonald's is, while it's a great aspirational brand, global brand, it's also a local brand. There's a huge amount of degrees of freedom to customize the menu, customize the marketing mix, customize the way the communication is developed, which is right for the Indian consumer or for that matter, any market. So that's the approach McDonald's has been taking over the years, which has worked for the brand. So there are no global mandates. For example, there are platforms that are very particular to India. TikTok, for example, is not across the world. It's exploding in some specific geographies, and the marketeers are engaged, kind of encouraged to kind of find their way and then share the learnings with the rest of the globe as to what works on these platforms.
Sure. So tell me, Arvind, everybody knows McDonald's. It's an established brand, and I'm sure if you were to run all sorts of metrics, you would top the charts. How do you maintain cultural relevancy to a brand like McDonald's, especially with regards to social media? I understand you've done a lot of influencer-led campaigns. You've done campaigns using the new music tool on Instagram, and there have been some iconic campaigns. But what is sort of like the long-term strategy for a brand which survives in a potentially more mindful India, India which is going back to its roots of sustainability? How do you continue to maintain cultural relevancy?
So at the outset, McDonald's is a very modern, progressive brand. And we take a lot of effort to kind of read the pulse of especially the millennials and the Gen Z who are so much into, who are digital natives, so to say, as compared to the other generations. So we want to be in touch with this consumer and use the media that this consumer normally uses. Having said that, being culturally relevant is such a challenging space to be in. So we have to recognize the fact that it's a global brand, and there are always local sensitivities. How do you kind of tailor the mix to tap into the local sensitivities? Some of the work that we have done, from a menu perspective is well known. We have aloo tikki, which is so relevant for the Indian consumer. So the same principle when we look at digital platforms, right? And we kind of evolve a code. We have, for example, something that worked very well for us, which is moments marketing. So we have social media listening, which kind of uncovers what is the buzzing topics, what are the relevant topics for the consumer. We immediately kind of react very fast and create content that is very relevant to the topic and relevant to the consumer. Sometimes it needs fast reaction. And sometimes these things are very, very much planned. I'll give you an example. From a McDonald's construct perspective, from a proposition perspective, variety is very important for the consumer. Consumers come to McDonald's and they expect a lot of variety in the menu, in what they want to choose. While at the same time, choice is such an important thing for them, we realized, and we wanted to take kind of pitch from a larger societal angle, we realized that when it came to the elections that went by earlier this year, they were not exercising their choice as much, right? They were all having opinions on the political processes, the politicians. But when it came to exercising their vote, they were reluctant. So we said, why not encourage them to go out and vote? We went away from our comfort zone from a brand perspective. And we said, okay, we will do an activation in some of our restaurants. We will also amplify digitally, wherein some of the consumers who came to our restaurants on the voting day, we said that you will not be able to exercise your choice from a food perspective unless you exercise the choice to vote. So we encourage consumers to go out and vote, come and show in their mark, and then they got their food that they ordered. So while this was a brave thing to do, given the circumstances, I think it paid off very well. Consumers took in the right spirit. The campaign went viral. And for us, this was a great example of how can you stretch the envelope. How can you be relevant to the consumer, from what's going on at that point in time, and be a part of the conversations out there. So I think as marketers try and stretch the envelope, they will uncover some of these sweet spots that probably they can be replicate from time to time.
Yeah, I think in millennial parlance, it was a very woke campaign. And just to shed some light on the campaign, it was a very interesting campaign. As customers walked into McDonald's, and let's say they ordered, a meal, at the other end of the counter, they would serve them a different meal, and obviously they got weird reactions from the customers. At which point, I think the messaging around, since people who had not voted had lost their chance to sort of, have their voice heard, and their decisions were essentially moot, hence they were just that was the campaign, right?
Absolutely.
Do you want to shed some more light on that campaign?
So absolutely, like you said, Angad. So it was what we call as a make your choice campaign. And when customers really got irritated at us, we have placed the order and we are buying it, but why are we not getting the order that we served? At which point, gently, very gently, the server tells them, exercise your choice to vote. The booth is nearby, and we kind of guided them to the booth. So it was more from encouraging consumers out there. So while we interacted with X number of consumers, we used that content to encourage the voters in the subsequent states, because it was a phase-wise election, to kind of go out and exercise their choice. And that's how we amplified the campaign.
You know, to further that, I think on the subject of being woke, obviously McDonald's, especially with regards to environment and health, has always had a tough time, and we'll discuss that. But I think, what about other aspects? As an organization, does McDonald's have a voice on, say, women's rights or gender equality or, you know, climate change at large? Are you sort of putting your opinions out there into the world, or is it still very sort of, you know, I understand you said you're progressive, so I'm assuming there is some strategy around these touchy subjects as well.
So McDonald's is a very democratic brand. I think we pride ourselves on that. If you look at the who comes into our restaurants, it's a very varied demographic. You have youngsters, you have young professionals, you have families that come to our restaurants, kids even. We are very cognizant of the fact that we have we represent a very broad spectrum of in terms of a consumer franchise. Having said that, when it comes to topics like that you said, we are very progressive, right? While we may not be going out and talking about each of those topics like some of the other brands like a Nike and so on and so forth, but from a reactive perspective, may not be proactive in those campaigns, but from a reactive perspective, we are totally there as far as those values are concerned.
Has McDonald's done anything in India, say, for transgenders? Is there a strategy around that?
Not really. But what we do have is, from our employees to our employees' perspective, we have a very wide and a democratic approach to giving employment opportunities to, for example, disabled employees, and we have quite neutral in terms of approach in terms of choosing our employees for the stores. Yes.
And I feel I have you cornered for this question.
You might have.
But how do you navigate fast food, an iconic fast food chain like McDonald's, in an era where people are getting so conscious about their health?
So that part, actually, McDonald's has done a great job, I would say. Yes, there was a time a few years back when there was a lot of buzz around this topic, specifically in US. But what that prompted was what we call as a start of the good food journey, and that was like a really global effort. While it was a global effort, each of the markets, I think, put in a lot of effort to make that come to life. So, for example, we kind of recast the menu over the past 3 years significantly. We kind of re-innovated all our patties, and they have about 20% less fat than what they had earlier. We reduced the sodium content in our fries, for example, by over 25%. We kind of changed the oils that we used in our restaurants, made them far less in terms of fat content. We were the pioneers in introducing whole wheat bun as an option to our buns. Today, about 60% of consumers choose whole wheat buns as a choice. So we have been taking a lot of proactive steps in India and in other markets to be ahead of the curve as far as these consumers are concerned in terms of progressive food choices and promoting the right things, because we are a very responsible brand, and far from being caught on the back foot, we want to kind of lead the way and show the way for other brands in this category as to what can be done in terms of progressive practices in the food industry.
So, if I have the stats right, broadly, I think the food delivery market right now is anywhere between $8.5–10 billion.
Yeah.
How has that impacted McDonald's, and especially with regards to a chain which is so widely spread across the country with its own fairly strong delivery fleet? How do you manage the relationship between marketplaces and your own delivery fleet, and where is your focus right now?
Right. So it's but a fact that the food delivery has really expanded the market as far as eat out is concerned, or for that matter, eat in is concerned. It has only helped to grow the category. I think that's something that we should all understand. It added that layer of convenience for the consumer and made available a plethora of food choices which he or she could order at the office or at home. So it has only helped the category from a growth perspective. McDonald's launched McDelivery about 6 years back, and that only showed the commitment that online delivery is here to stay. And when the recent explosion of food delivery, the Swiggies and the Zomatos happened over the past 2, 3 years. We work with them very closely as partners. We are available on those platforms. We work with them very closely to make McDonald's really accessible to every consumer there are. So for us, it's incremental business from a business perspective, and from a consumer perspective, it just helps the brand to be closer to them. So far from being a threat, I think we treat them as partners because food delivery is here to stay. We aim to kind of integrate very closely with them, work with them. They share a lot of insights with us that we use from time to time. And it's really a collaboration as far as we are concerned.
You know, there's a growing trend for most consumer brands, regardless of which category they operate in, to start thinking of themselves as media brands. So if I was to ask you, Arvind, what would McDonald's reimagined as a media brand look like?
Well, McDonald's reimagined would be from a content perspective, completely in terms of, for example, we talk about romanticizing the food. We talk about, there's a term called food porn in our category, which is, bringing alive the food and the variety of food that we have. And there's a whole industry behind that. So I would say from a digital content perspective, if McDonald's reimagined would be a complete food content platform. And if I, look through the menu across the globe, right, and the fantastic array of menu variety that you see from McDonald's Australia or McDonald's Scandinavia, McDonald's China, right, McDonald's Thailand or McDonald's India, and if I were to reimagine all of it coming together, I think that's something very interesting and very appealing to most consumers.
So I think we have about 2-3 questions left between us before
Right.
we'll open
So
it
I
up
have
to
one, right? So MensXP and IDIVA, very interesting brands, and they're doing something very different compared to some of the global examples. You guys established yourself as content leaders to begin with, before foraying into e-commerce, whereas most e-commerce brands kind of add a layer of content to what they do. So what was the intent behind that, and how has it been so far?
Very interesting, actually, and thank you for asking me that. So, MensXP is about 8.5, 9-year-old brand. It was built on the back of woke content built around how a man should be progressive in an emerging India. That's sort of broadly the thematic or the theme which brought together the founding philosophy of the editorial team. I think with that, we got a lot of things right. With that, we were able to create a very, very strong social community, very, very highly engaged and highly responsive community, on the back of which a lot of things were becoming true. A lot of products whose hypotheses partner brands wanted to test was done on that community. We built some of India's most fantastic IPs. IDIVA ran IPs like The Honest. MensXP runs a very famous IP called The Honest Review, South Delhi Girls on IDIVA, and so on and so forth. About 20, 25 such fantastic IPs, all built on the back of that community. As we sort of started looking around, two things. One, the changing trends of social media, not only in China and in the US, but also in India, where a lot of these platforms, social media platforms, were adding layers of commerce, right? Instagram is sort of like the holy grail for the D2C revolution happening in India right now. And we felt we had a large part to play in that endeavor, while still being true to, at an emotional level, our brand, our community. And with that, we started our endeavor to create a community-sourced brand. We started a brand called Mud, which is actually India's first men's beauty brand. Our first product that we launched on the back of the recommendation of the community is a BB cream for men. So it's a very different way of doing business, and I think we wanted to deconstruct a lot of these sort of dogmas and strategies that publisher can't get into commerce, why commerce is not going to be into a media company by launching this brand. Today we've launched over 18 brands, 18 D2C brands. Some of our influencers, which have been sort of the custodians of the voice of MensXP and IDEVA, are now custom brand owners, are either a beauty line or fashion line, and it's being sold through these platforms, all on the back of that community. So in a way, I think our evolution has happened from, say, whether it was text to video, as Geo brought in cheaper data, the community's demand from us changed. And now, as we have been for years now, promoting other people's products, there is an expectation from the community for us to be responsible to what we promote and essentially even complete the loop certain times. So that's broadly what we're doing right now.
And it's very interesting you talked about men's beauty, because that's definitely not mainstream. But when you look at East Asian markets, men's beauty is an extremely big category. So just to pick your mind, how did you arrive at such a concept and what made you launch it?
So, our thought around one, I think being progressive is the underlying layer for MensXP. So we always wanted to build our first brand which thematically matched that philosophy. Second, our BB cream serves two purposes. One, of course, it gives you, an even skin tone. It gives you sort of, people who have scars or acne, etc., etc. It conceals them. But more than that, I think it was a statement that a product which is as progressive as potentially a foundation for men is going to be eventually acceptable in a country like India. Right? So if I was to ask the normal guy out here, they would never ever even out here accept that they're wearing a BB cream or they're not wearing a BB cream. But you would be shocked to know how many men in India are buying Pond's BB cream, saying that they're buying it for their wives and they're buying it for their whatever, girlfriends and so on and so forth. Much like how once they bought Fair and Handsome or Fair and Lovely. They would buy Fair and Lovely, saying it's for their wives and girlfriends and so on and so forth. But actually they would use it. Hence the company came out with Fair and Handsome. So I think we are in a very sort of vocal India now. People are not shy to express themselves. And we luckily have we have I think about 60 million people. MensXP alone does about 65 million people on social media, about 20 million captive reach. So we're sitting on a lot of data and a large community, which gives us a testing ground for us to be able to launch a product and ensure it's a sustainable business model.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
But you're right. I think in countries like South Korea and Japan, makeup for men is now as mainstream as it is for women. Yeah. At least BB cream. In fact, South Koreans even accept lipsticks acceptable for a large category of men.
I can see some surprised faces there. Having been in the beauty category before this, I can also vouch for those numbers. It's pretty mainstream in some of those markets.